Good afternoon. My name is Thomas Willingham. I'm the Technical Product Manager for Desktop Virtualization and Azure Remote App. We also are lucky enough today to have Eric Orman from the product team with us. Azure Remote App. So we're here today to talk about Azure Remote App. It is fundamentally the application that enables access to your Windows applications anywhere on any device, even on the beach, as long as you have Wi-Fi. Brad Anderson, you saw in Brad Anderson's keynote, he accessed Dynamics on an iPad, and he could have just as easily performed that same demo on, as Eric mentioned, an iOS device, which he did, an Android device, a Mac device, or a Windows device. So no longer, when you have legacy applications, legacy Windows applications in your environment, do you have to wonder, how am I going to enable my mobile users to be productive on this? Azure Remote App can be your answer. So here's a list of just some of the applications that we enable users to be productive on using Azure Remote App. All of these are Windows-based clients that may or may not have alternate platform clients associated with them. So today's challenges. Some things to think about are, and I've kind of mentioned this, is you have legacy Windows applications, you have Windows applications. How do you enable your mobile workforce to gain access to those applications? If you don't have a mobile strategy in place of some kind, your users are going to work around you. Statistic for you. 80% of users admit to using personal SaaS apps to get work done. And this isn't because they're mean or malicious or trying to harm the company. It's 6 o'clock at night. Somebody's working on some financials. They want to go home and have dinner with their family. So what do? They park the application. They put it in an online storage, OneDrive, Dropbox, whatever. They email it to themselves. When they get home, they have dinner with their family, they work on it. Once that's in the cloud, as an IT environment, you've just lost control of that data. Using Azure Remote App, the application is run in the cloud, and then you can configure where you want those data and resources to be stored. In the cloud, on premises. So no matter where that user is working, or even if that device is lost or compromised, the data and resources are still protected. How do you respond to dynamic needs in your environment? You may have a seasonal aspect to your business. Maybe holidays are a big business for you. Maybe summers are a big business for you. How do you manage that increased workflow? You can do it a couple different ways. One, you can set up your infrastructure for that peak capability, which means during off-season you have a lot of idle systems. The second method is you can kind of hit the middle, which means during peak times people aren't getting the service that they want. And as I mentioned earlier, if people aren't getting the service that they want, they'll figure out ways to work around it. Azure Remote App has an elastic nature to it. As more users use the service, it spins more servers up. As those users log off, it spins the servers down. You've heard talk of flexible architecture. What this means is when you put Azure Remote App or add Azure Remote App to your environment, there's nothing extra that you need to put in. You don't need to put in additional servers, additional gateways. You can just integrate this with your environment. This goes to reducing infrastructure costs, moving CapEx to OpEx. If you've been an IT pro for any length of time, you've gone through the scenario where you spec'd out a system, you figured out how much the hardware and software was going to cost, and depending on your environment, maybe 6 months to 18 months later, you spec the project out, you got the hardware on site, however much that costs, 50, 100, 250,000, depending on what you've spec'd out for. And then maybe by that time that project was canceled. That team, that group decided to go another way. So now you have $100,000 worth of hardware that your users are putting pictures of dogs and cats on. Not that there's anything wrong with dogs and cats, but that's probably not why you spent that money. Instead, why don't you use a different model? Why don't you use a model that, as the environment is needed, the servers are spun up? So you don't have to create that infrastructure. We manage that infrastructure for you. Again, providing access to those legacy Windows-based applications. How do you ensure your users have access to those? Again, across their wide variety of devices. You have a couple options. You can either dev it yourself, which if it's an older application, you probably don't want to invest that money. Or again, use Azure RemoteApp. And then finally, I've touched on this a bit already, protecting corporate resources. So as you use Azure RemoteApp, no data or resources are kept on that device. So if the device, maybe it's a mobile device, is lost, stolen, or compromised, the data or resources aren't on that device and can still be protected. Kind of the history of way in the session-based computing side of the slide, we hearken back to the terminal services days, mid-90s. This was users sharing a session on a server. So users would have their own environment and would be able to work simultaneously on a server. This was a pretty decent environment, but it ran into a few issues. A couple issues is, one, you were running on a server-based operating system, and two, some applications don't fare well in a shared environment. If they don't follow the standard-based methods for installation, maybe they installed into the user directory. Maybe they didn't install into the right registry area. Well, if they didn't follow those standards, they're not going to work in a shared environment. So some applications just didn't work effectively in this environment. How do you overcome that? So 2009 to 2010, VDI came about. So now users are accessing client desktops. Now there's some additional functionality. One, you've kind of mitigated the whole context issue. So now all applications will work on those because you're working on a true client. Two, there's admin capability in this. Some problems that occurred are it can be kind of a pricey option. It costs a little bit more than we thought it would initially. Initially, it was touted as the new hope. Everybody's going to move to VDI and it was going to save everything. And then we stepped back and found it's a little more expensive than we thought it was. What's more expensive, local storage or network storage? We found it wasn't as cost effective as we thought it would be. So that's kind of our on-premises solution. And then as we kind of migrate through the timeline, we start talking about RDS on IaaS. And I'm kind of moving through some of this stuff a bit quickly. This is some of the fundamental stuff because I want to get to Eric's area where he starts digging deeper. stood on stage about a year ago and released this product, and we've done a lot since then. So we want to ensure that you get that new information. So now RDS and IaaS, so running the infrastructure in the cloud, running your session-based desktops in the cloud, so server-based desktops in the cloud. And then finally, Azure RemoteApp. Azure RemoteApp is a complete service that's very straightforward to use, that enables your users to use these Windows-based applications across a variety of devices. A year ago, we announced this in preview. We GA'd in December. And all these dots are blips along the way of what's been added. One thing that we're really proud of for Azure RemoteApp is the fact that y'all are used to the server cadence of every 4 years, major release, every 2 years, the minor release. Now, look at everything that we've done in the last year. Initially, we only allowed custom apps in the cloud, or we only allowed custom apps on the hybrid model. Now that's enabled in the cloud. Bulk user imports. We implemented secure WebSockets, so we standardized on port 443, enabled express routes. So you see there's a lot going on right here. If you want to know more kind of about the foundational information, you can go to Channel 9. We've done some talks there, so you'll get more of this type of information. The two deployment methods, there's a cloud-based model and a hybrid model. The cloud model, you can get going in less than 10 clicks. You can use images that we've put up, rapid provisioning, identity flexibility, the ability to use different sets of credentials. And if you use the image template, we manage the template for you. Versus the hybrid model, fully customizable apps, you manage the image, integrates back with on-premises. And then kind of across the two, they're all based on Windows Server 2012 R2. The dynamic scalability, as users are added, it's scaled out. As users drop off, it drops off servers, it turns them off. A global presence. We're currently in 13, I believe, data centers across the world. High fidelity using a mature protocol, which is secure WAN-ready connectivity. And then a variety of clients. So now at this point, we have foundation level, we're set, we kind of know where we're at. This has been the past year. Now I want to bring Eric up and talk about what we've done and really start to dig into what we have and how it works. Eric?
Cool. Thanks, Thomas. Fundamentals are fun, so let's have some fun. I'm Eric Orman, and this is what we're going to be talking about. So Thomas gave a really good overview of Azure RemoteApp. Again, he showed the Channel 9. That was a video that you can go out and watch. It's like an hour and 15 minutes long that Thomas did with Tristan, another peer of mine at Tech Ed Barcelona. He talks a lot more detail. So with that foundation of just what you heard, and if you're new to Azure RemoteApp, in fact, who's actually tried Azure RemoteApp? Like you went through the deployment. Wow, okay. So I will guarantee if you are new, you'll learn something, of course. But if all you guys with your hands up, you're going to learn a lot today also. So, and if you don't, find me afterwards or at the booth. Kind of the theme of what I'm going to be talking about is called the cycle of management and administration. I'm going to spend the bulk on that. And then the last couple minutes of the session, I'm going to talk about will my app work? And so I'm going to take QuickBooks and I'm going to put that through because that's the number one app that I get on the forums, the feedback sites. And so I'm going to walk through that kind of application and the different deployment types in Azure RemoteApp that works. And so what this cycle of administration and management, so this is going to be a journey. So if you've ever started Azure RemoteApp, or you're new to it, or this was the process that you would take. Basically, we're going to select an image, and on the image are your applications. We're going to publish apps. We're going to assign users. Then we're going to go into the client experience and talk about all the different depths on that. Redirection, how to get shared drive, shared storage, and then update and upload an image. Like you need to make changes. How do you do that? How does it integrate with Config Manager? How does it integrate with Hyper-V? So let's dive into this. So this circle, I'm going to keep coming back into it. I'm going to spend a lot of time in each of these kind of buckets. So in this next section, I'm going to talk about selecting the image, custom apps. How do I put custom applications? In fact, I'm going to show you a demo of that here in a sec. Which apps work on Azure RemoteApp, talk about the application requirements, best practice, and create a custom image. You guys can all read this stuff, so let's hop on here. 8 clicks. Thomas said 10 clicks, 8 clicks to create an Azure RemoteApp collection. Those hands that went up, did you try or did you actually do this yet? How many actually created a cloud deployment or quick create? Okay. Raise your other hand if you did the VPN with hybrid. Okay, good. So 8 clicks to create a cloud collection, quick create, very simple. You name it, region, give it a billing plan, particular your image, click next, and that kind of walks you through that. What is this image? Well, an image has your applications on it that you want to publish, so you need to select an image. And we have what we call the Microsoft images, which are these provided images. There's 3 of them that are up there. We have our Pro Plus, we have an Office 365, and then we have just kind of our vanilla one. But then, if you want a custom line of business application, let's say you had QuickBooks or My Home app or My Company app or something, you need to create a custom image with that application in it. I'm going to demo how to do that. So these Microsoft images are really quick for demos, throwing them up there. They have Office. If you have O365, it makes the experience a lot better. But if you're creating a custom image on the right-hand side, there's kind of some key differences between those. So the Microsoft images, you do not have administrative access, so you cannot add applications to that. So whatever is available on that image is available for you to use. So if you pick the Office one, you can use Office, you can use Paint, Calculator, you can publish any application that's on that image. If you have a custom image, of course, you can do whatever you want with that. The Microsoft images are pre-configured and optimized. Your custom images, we don't really know what you did with them, so they might not work. So you guys should test those out. Allow custom apps, we talked about that, admin access, Microsoft Manage. So that's a key thing with the Microsoft images. So if you select one of those, every month we'll update those and keep those going. For custom images, you're required to maintain those images. That means you need to do the updating on those for software updates. I'm going to walk you through how to actually do that. Office. So let's talk about Office, because I saw a lot of errors poke up. So the only way to use Office in Azure RemoteApp is if you have the Office 365 Pro Plus plan. Now that plan comes bundled with all E3 and E4 O365 subscriptions, or you could buy it as an add-on if you have the business plan. But either way, it uses shared computer activation, and so you need Office 365 Pro Plus in order to have that. We have 2 kind of images that I talked about with that. So when you do like their 30-day trial, I would pick the one that says 30-day trial. If you have an O365 Pro Plus, you could pick that one. Cool thing about shared computer activation is that it does not count towards your activations on your O365 subscription. It does not count if you share computer activation with this. Demo. Oops. All right. So here I am. I'm logged into the Azure portal. So that's where everything starts. So in order to use Azure RemoteApp, you need to have a Azure subscription. And so there's kind of 2 different things. We have a 30-day trial, and there's the Azure 30-day trial. I'll kind of explain those a little bit later. But if you sign up for Azure, I'm pretty sure everyone has an Azure subscription. If you don't, go out and get a 30-day one and give it a try. So down here on the left-hand side is RemoteApp. I'm going to click down here. I've already created 2 collections in here. I'm going to give you kind of just a quick drive-by if you guys have not seen this. But if you drill into it, we've got a dashboard. This is where it shows the amount of usage that you are currently consuming, user access. I'm going to get to this later. This is where you grant users access, publishing. This is where you publish those applications. I'm going to get into that. That's another demo that I'm going to be showing you guys. Sessions. So these are your active sessions. I don't have any active ones on this particular one. And then scale. It's more on the billing on that. So let's hop over and figure out what this collection is and how to. It's basically, I'm going to show you, you have a custom application. How do I get that in Azure RemoteApp? Well, there's 2 different ways. And I'm going to show you the easiest way, and we just released this way, and that's to create it using an Azure VM. So very simple. Pretty sure everyone's created an Azure VM. You come up here, click New down at the bottom, and I'm going to select from a gallery in here. And so in here, There's a couple of options. We actually have a gallery image available to you. And so it's the remote desktop server, remote Windows server, remote desktop session host. I had too many 5-hour energies. You select that. That's a good base image to start with. So I'm going to click on that. Over here, version release date, machine, ignite now. Size, this doesn't really matter. When you're building this image, the compute will be charged to your Azure subscription. So we could just pick, a basic one, username, test. Whoops. Nope. Yay. How about Eric? That's easy. Cloud service, kind of pick these, pick your different regions that you have. It really doesn't matter. You're just creating an image on that. Next. Here, you can selectively choose what security extensions, antivirus. We already have SCEP, System Center Endpoint Protection, baked into that image already for you. So if you want to select one of these other ones, you can do that. And basically, you're going to click Done. And that's going to go out, and it's going to provision. It's going to take a while. But for the sake, we already have one cooked here. So let's just fast forward 10 minutes, and I have one here. I'm going to remote desktop to this. So here I am. I've got the image. And basically, all I have to do at this point in time is just bring my apps. I just need to install my particular apps. So navigate out, install QuickBooks, install your My Line of Business application, configure this image with any other customizations that you want. What I would strongly recommend is make sure your applications, they exist in the Start menu when you're done. That'll make life easier later on. Make sure you have an icon in here and it's on the Start menu. It's going to make life easier later on. I'm going to show you why. Otherwise, you're going to have to know the command line path to it, which isn't hard, but it's just not going to be as convenient for you. So at that point in time, you install your apps. We have this script up here. The script is there for you. So when you're done, click on it. What this is doing is it's checking to make sure that the image is properly configured and you didn't mess it up. There are some things that in there that we need to optimize to make sure when we create the Azure Remote App service that it works flawlessly. So at the end of this, it's going to ask you to launch sysprep. You're going to click yes, and what that's going to happen is it's going to sysprep the image, shut it down. So at that point in time, you're going to have a VM that's going to be sysprepped and shut down. Next thing you'll need to do is basically capture that. So at the bottom down here, click the capture. It's still running, but it would be shut down after the sysprep happens. You can name it, click Next, and what that will do is come up here in the images, and it's going to put it up there in the images. So again, the power of cooking. I have already created one that's up here. It's called Ignite Eric Special. I have another one that I created for a webinar about a month ago. And so that completes the stuff within the Azure VM. Now I need to take that image, and I need to import it into my Azure Remote App library. So I'm going to hop back over here, go back to Remote App. Here up at the top is template images. And so in there, I'm going to click that. And I've already imported a couple of them. Down here at the bottom, so we need to import it. And here's where there's kind of two options. One, we created this image from an Azure VM. That's great. It's quick. It's fast. But you also can create this on premises. So if you want to use Config Manager, if you want to just create it raw using Hyper-V, you can do that. But then you'll have to upload that to Azure. These images are huge. They could be gigs, and that could take time, lots of time. So that was the way that we had. Strongly recommend what we have in there from the machine gallery. So there it is. I could pick which one that I want. I click Confirm. And most of the time, you guys don't read what this says, but these are very, 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 very important points. Ensure my applications meet the app requirements. I'm going to talk what are the app requirements to have my application running in Azure Remote App. It's actually the next slide that I go into. I'm going to ensure my image meets the image requirements. There are some things in here. I think the biggest one is you never put data on the image. So like putting your SQL server on there, that's bad. Data should always reside externally. I'm going to explain the reason why for that. And it goes back to our elasticity that we have within the Azure Remote App service. So data never resides actually on the image. It's always external. I'll stomp my foot again later. You've run the validation script. Again, don't bypass that script. It's there for your protection. You've run sysprep. That's where you got. I'm going to click Next. You're going to name it. Very important here. When you do the import, it doesn't matter when you do the imports. You could have created in Australia, and you want it now in the West US. There's no charge for these intra-data center or the storage of it whatsoever. But just make sure, whichever one that you select on this list, that image, when you go to create your collection, if you want to create your collection in Australia, well, you need to import the image into Australia. Kind of makes sense. Click Next. That was it. Basically, it goes through. It's going to start importing, and it takes roughly 10 to 15 minutes, and that's about done. Very simple, very easy to do that. I'll get into some detailed steps later on of how to do that if you want to create it manually on that. But that's pretty much it in terms of how to get your image, install your application, and do it just simply from an Azure VM. What are those application compatibility testing? So your line of business application, will it work in Azure Remote App? Approximately 85% of what we see, applications do work. Basically, the fundamental thing is if your application follows standard Windows application best practices, and it also supports in a multi-session, then it will work. Easiest way to test that is just when you're creating that image up there, just create 2 user accounts, user A, user B, do a remote desktop, do another remote desktop, launch the app, and if it works, then you're pretty sure that it's actually going to work in Azure Remote App. It's multi-session aware. It's that simple. That's what I mean by multi-user awareness. Resource utilization. Applications, some of them might be hungry. They might use a lot of memory. They might use a lot of CPU. They might utilize other resources. Just be wary of that. You're in a multi-session environment. Beware of any remoting nuances. So good things that we've heard is like Outlook, like sometimes the taskbar doesn't pop up, or Skype, the home version of it doesn't have them, the taskbar notifications. So there might be some remoting nuances within your application that you'll want to be aware with. Windows Store apps are not supported. What do I mean by that? Those are those universal apps on Windows 8 and Windows 10, or Windows Server 2016 as they call it now. Those are not supported. Only the classic Windows 32 apps. And again, after you get your image created, test it, test it, test it, test it. Like I said before, install on Windows Server 2012 R2, check to see if it's multi-session aware, validate app behavior. There's some links. You guys can download this deck later on. We have some documentation that dives into that if you're not sure. So, template image creation tips. So here's some good things to take home. These are notes when you're creating your image. Goes back to the one, start menu shortcuts exist for the published applications. That's going to save you time later. Add a local administrator. So if you want to do things of elevation later on, troubleshooting that particular image, you can get to that if you're using in a cloud deployment. Keep your images updated regularly. So like I said, custom images, we're not managing those. Those are you guys. So you'll need to be responsible for those software updates on a monthly basis. So if it's monthly, if it's quarterly, just make sure you keep them updated. Disable automatic software updates for published applications. Some applications have an auto updater in there. Recommend that you uninstall that, or you don't enable that feature, that capability. The next one, install the RDSH rule. That's really if you're doing it step by step on premises in a Hyper-V environment. And create and test, like I said before you do the import and upload. We actually have step-by-step guidance of how to create this. There's a link down at the bottom. It's all in our documentation. Step-by-step how to do the upload also. Moving on. So you guys seen 10 clicks to create a collection. You now understand what an image is. You now understand the application requirements for that. And when you click Next, it takes like 20 or 30 minutes. What the heck is going on? That's probably what everyone is wondering, right? Yes. So let's talk about that. We call that state provisioning. So what's happening on the back end of that is basically we're creating instances. So what happens is that master image is we're creating copies of those. We call them clones, we call them instances, and that's really much like Jango Fett from Star Wars. They created a whole bunch of clones of the guy, and that became the clone army. It's kind of very similar to that in that same kind of concept. And ultimately, that allows us that elasticity, that elastic runtime. We're a turnkey solution. The easiest way I think of Azure RemoteApp is like O365 is to Exchange. You bring your identity, and you bring your content or your email. Azure RemoteApp, you bring your identity, and you bring your apps. That's pretty it. We take care of everything else. You don't have to worry about your DMZs, your DNSs, all those other things to set up and worry about. We handle that. Scale up, scale down. You don't need to worry about those different things. We handle that. That's part of the service that we provide, to include the cows. It's all wrapped up in the subscription, Windows Server costs. You actually don't have to pay for that. And so what's happening on the back end during that provisioning state is when you add users, we're continuing to scale up and adjust. So as more users, you assign users, and when they start using the service, we're automatically creating and scaling up those instances on the back end. So when I talked about earlier, it's very important not to put your data on the image. You should understand why now. Because when you're on instance 4, the data is going to be different. Data should always reside externally. So your SQL servers and those other particular things. Yes, sir, I'll ask questions at the end. We've got a lot of content. Important things. So really, what are these instances? They're really just OS hosts for the applications. You never store data on them. And we only charge for the active sessions. And I'll cover into that a little bit later. But understanding that, you should have a foundation now of understanding how our service scales, why we require an image, and kind of what happens on the back end when we're scaling up. What's under the covers? What's powering all this? Well, on our basic and our standard plans, it's both a 4-core, 7-gig A3 large VM. CPU fair share is enabled. There is no RAM fair share concept. So these are all the same things that come in Windows Server 2012 R2 and not specific to Azure RemoteApp. So going back, when you talk about those application requirements on a shared server, you want to be wary of those compute and memory hung applications because they're going to starve the other users on that. You might not get the greatest experience on that. So select an image. We're done with that. Yeah, I'll get to them at the end. I got a lot of content to get through. Just to let you know, there's a lot of gurus up here. We'll answer them at the end. Plus, I'll be at our booth for like the rest of the day through the night until you guys are done. So, in our theater sessions. So demo, let's talk about how to publish applications. No, I'm not going to show just Word, like the gentleman up front here, like we did before in the past. So I'm going to hop out to the portal over here. And so what I'm going to do is, where's Azure RemoteApp here? And so I'm going to use this particular account and publishing. So come up here. So there's a list of default published applications that are up here. So if I want to publish an application, I'm going to go down to the bottom where it says publish. And as you can see down here, there's 2 options. Publish programs using path and publish start menu programs. And this is where I was telling about earlier, when you're creating your image, it's a good practice to make sure that your apps are on the start menu. It's going to make it a lot easier. And the reason for that is when you publish start menu, we interrogate that image as part of that processing. And so we list the available applications that are on that start menu for you to use. And so as you can see up here, there's quite a lot of them that were on there. By default, Access is not. I get a lot of feedback. People say, well, where's Access? Well, let's publish Access. And let's just go publish Internet Explorer because that's where my next demo is about. So I'm going to click Next. And those particular applications are going to publish to you out there. And while those are publishing, one of the other big things that I get from somebody is basically, how do I publish a click once application? But first, I want to show you guys something out here. So the easiest way to do that, I need to grab a link. I don't have a good click once application, so actually I'm going to publish just the Azure RemoteApp click once app. So I'm publishing Internet Explorer. I already had one published here. I'm going to click down here at the bottom where there's Edit. There's Publish, Edit, and Unpublish. So I'm going to click Edit. And in here, let's just change this to click once. And I have this saved. And basically, this is just the URL to that click once application. So click once applications are really easy. You could just use one of the Microsoft images, just publish Internet Explorer, and then change the command line path to it. will just point to your URL of your Click Once application. So you're going to click OK, and basically you see it change the name. It doesn't change the icons yet. That's a good piece of feedback that we've been getting. But basically, it's going to publish this Click Once application. While that's going out there, it's going to take a second to do that. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to show you guys something. So this is the projector PC up here. And so I want to launch an application. And so one of the cool things about being at these demo presentations, I get to show you some of the cool code that our engineers are working on. So our number one feedback item that we've had out there is basically, I would like to have my Azure Remote Apps integrated with my start menu and the start screen. Well, this is coming. And as you guys can see, I published the command prompt. I clicked on it from the start menu, and it's going to launch and start that application. It's still going. Meantime, so back to that Click Once app. I'm going to come back down here, and there it is, Click Once app right here. You guys can see it right here in the middle of the screen. Already there, it's already available. What's the experience? Whoops. What's that experience when it clicks? So I'm going to click on that, and it's going to launch that Click Once application. I'm going to minimize this screen here so you could see it. It's going to launch it. Oops. There it goes. It's going to lock the Azure Remote App client, and it's going to prompt me to install that. I didn't have to create a custom image to publish a Click Once app. I just used a simple Microsoft image and just changed the URL paths on it. Very, very simple to do that. Clicked install, and it can run. So there's a lot of things in here in terms of when you publish your apps. You could also publish via the start menu, or the, whoops, I didn't want that. Publish. So I could publish using path also. And in here, if I want to publish something else, whoops, we could say MSRA if I want to do that. Window system 32, MSRA.exe, whatever exe is available on that image, because you can only publish applications that are on that image. Click Next, and that's going to go out and publish that particular application, and it's going to be available for you. If we have time later on, I'm going to show you how to do remote assistance of an Azure Remote App instance. It's going to be pretty cool. Pretty much that's easy, how to publish an application. Key things on this is basically you can only publish applications that reside on the image. And don't forget about how to publish them and change the command line paths. If we have some time later on, I'm going to show you how that might actually happen where you could publish an app from OneDrive, which is pretty neat. So going back. AppV, Aaron Ruckman's in the audience. He's got a session here on Friday, right? So he's going to be diving into AppV. General question we get, is AppV supported on Azure Remote App? The answer to that is yes. There's a deployment method called hybrid and cloud. It's only supported in hybrid because AppV has a requirement that to use AppV, you have to be on a domain joined PC. So that's part of the licensing agreement with that. There's a table here. There's lots of ways of configuring AppV and streaming to them. I'm not going to go into the details of those particular items. There's the delivery method. Do you want to stream it? Do you want to mount it or basically have it on the image? Do you want app location to be shared? Do you want it to be cached on the disk? Then targeting with user and global. There's a lot of positives. There's a lot of things. Depending upon your AppV architecture, there's a lot of different ways to configure this. I'm not going to give a recommendation, but one of the ones that gives you the most agility and flexibility is not having to change that image. So the easiest way on that is use streaming with shared content and targeting the user. So we're done with that part. You now know about the image. You know how to publish applications. Now let's talk about users. You need to assign the users. So there's, at this point in time, Thomas talked about cloud and we talked about hybrid. I want you to focus on the cloud column. There's lots of green checkbox. Basically, any type authenticated user that Azure supports, a cloud deployment or a quick create supports it. That includes Microsoft accounts. You guys all signed into it. At the beginning, I was talking about the demo, sign in user Microsoft account. So you can create a cloud deployment and assign somebody a Hotmail account to it, and they can access it. In terms of Azure Active Directory, there's AD Cloud, AD Connect, that's DirSync, that's the new name for it, Password Sync. You guys can read all these. Third-party integration, multi-factor, O365 accounts. I have another slide on that where I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But the underlying layer, O365 accounts are really just Azure Active Directory accounts under the hood. A lot of people don't know that. O365 accounts are really just Azure Active Directory accounts underneath the hood. Hybrid. Why are there not a lot of checkboxes in hybrid? To understand that, we need to first step back and understand what a hybrid deployment is and understand the architecture for that. So let's talk about this. For the sake of this, we're going to talk about I have on-premises, I have my domain controller, my Active Directory sits in my data center. That could be also in an Azure VM if you wanted to. But for the sake of what I'm going to be talking about today, it's on-premises in your guys' data center. Or in my case, it's underneath my desk in my office or in my test environment. When you walk through a hybrid deployment, it's going to ask you a couple of questions. The first one, it's going to say, link a virtual network. So you're going to have to create an Azure VNet. So simply just go out in the Azure Management Portal, create a VNet. Give it enough IP addresses. We recommend at least 100 or more. A minimum of 30, so we recommend 100. What you're going to do is connect these two. So you're going to connect your Azure VNet to your on-premises using a VPN. It could be ExpressRoute, it could be a site-to-site, but you connect those two. So the Azure VNet is basically a hybrid data center. It's an extension of your on-premise environment. You could put VMs in there. You could put other different things. It doesn't matter. We're going to ask you a domain join credentials. That's in the bottom right-hand corner is what the UI looks like in our Azure Management Portal for doing that. You're going to link a VNet. You're going to ask you the domain join credentials. Because what's going to happen is during that provisioning phase that I talked about earlier, we're going to be out there and we're putting those instances into that VNet. We're creating them. And also what's happening is through that VPN tunnel back to on-premise, we're doing a domain join. So by the time that the provisioning is done, you have your Azure RemoteApp instances running in an Azure VNet connected back to on-prem. They're domain joined. That's the architecture. So things that might go wrong during the collection creation or that provisioning phase is if the DNS is not configured properly. So you're putting those instances. If your Azure VNet doesn't have the DNS properly configured, domain join is going to fail. And you might get a screenshot like on the top right-hand corner that says the collection creation process. So you need to fix your DNS. You might have not specified enough IP addresses. Recommend at least 100 of them. Forced tunneling is not supported. Forced tunneling is not supported. And that Azure VNet needs to have internet access. So you cannot be closed. It needs to have internet access. And so it's simple. If you're doing a hybrid deployment and something goes wrong and you do get a collection creation failure, the easiest troubleshooting is just create an Azure VM, put it in that same VNet, and just attempt to do a domain join. If it's successful, you could probably think that the Azure RemoteApp deployment will work just fine. But if it's not, then you could troubleshoot that particular thing. Another big thing is if that validation script checks are bypassed. We said that that script is there when you're creating that custom image, there for your protection. We check some things to make sure that you always have a first-time successful attempt. If you're configuring wacky things in that image, you may not. Our script checks those things, so make sure you run those script. So back to this diagram. So we've just created our Azure RemoteApp collection. Things are there. We have our VMs, all successful. Those are actually running in Azure, connected back to OnCorp. Kind of the next thing that I want to walk you through to really understand why AD Connect credentials are only supported in a hybrid. So the thing that we also have to do is set up an AD Connect, where we have to connect our on-premise users. We have to synchronize those up into Azure Active Directory. So at this point in time, this is where you've completed. You're now ready to start assigning users. When you assign a user and they launch an Azure RemoteApp app, the first thing that they're going to actually have to do is sign in. So Melissa's going to have to sign in. What happens in that period of time is that sign-in authorization happens against Azure Active Directory. The next part of that is you're going to launch a particular application. In this case, it's PowerPoint. You're going to launch PowerPoint. What's happening at that is now you're getting a second prompt. People are always wondering, what's this second prompt? The second prompt is actually you're doing a domain logon to those Azure RemoteApp instances that are in a VNet, connected back to your on-premise, domain joined to your on-premises domain controller. And so that's why that we require you have 80 connected accounts. Does that make sense? That's kind of the general flow of those things. So, can I deploy to an existing VNet in a hybrid? Yes. And a cloud deployment? Soon, in like 30 days. What's the other big thing with the hybrid deployment? It requires 80 connected, dir sync accounts, domain join, and requires domain controller to be accessible from the VNet. Those are all things and characteristics of what a hybrid deployment is. A cloud deployment could be considered really just a work group deployment. I'll get to your question at the end, sir. So what type of users can you assign? Today, an Azure subscription only allows you to associate one directory. So you can't have Fairfax.com and Contoso.com and Centralia.com all in there. You can only have one. So if you have Contoso.com, those are the only type of users that you can actually assign to. So Eric at Contoso.com is an example. You can't assign Eric at Fairfax.com. There's only one account that you can in that particular thing. And that goes, the only exception of that is with a cloud deployment where you can have Microsoft accounts. But for a hybrid deployment, again, they require those 80 connected. And you could change that just going to settings, and you click on directory, and you can actually change that particular setting for that. Back to O365. Like I said before, O365 accounts underneath are really just Azure Active Directory accounts. So one of the things that people don't know is when you log on to the O365 portal, you scroll down, you see Azure Active Directory, click on that, follow the prompts, there's quite a few of them, and eventually you'll log into an Azure portal where you're not going to have a whole lot of those things on the left-hand side, and you can actually get to your identity. So things that we hear on the forums and the feedback side is, I created Azure RemoteApp in this subscription, but how do I connect my O365 users? Well, you have a subscription over here with Azure RemoteApp. You have a subscription over here with your O365. You need to delegate this directory to this one over here. So you need to delegate that directory in there. So basically add them as a co-administrator, and then go back to this other subscription with your Azure RemoteApp is in, set it to be the default one, the Contoso.com as an example. Then you can use Azure RemoteApp in that one. Or just elevate your existing O365 Azure subscription to be a full subscription, and then you can actually create them in there also. Either way, those are kind of the two options. But underneath Azure Active Directory, that holds the identity for your O365 users. One of the other things we get is the common UPN mix match. I have .locals, and how do I use that in a hybrid deployment? At that point in time, you're going to start getting into UPN mismatches. The suffix is wrong. You need to add those back to your Active Directory account. Multi-factor authentication. We integrate seamlessly with multi-factor authentication, follow standard Azure practices in order to enable that. But what's really cool is the new conditional access stuff that's coming. And since RemoteApp relies on Azure Active Directory, all the Azure Active Directory premium conditional access policies are available to you. They list them up there. Follow standard practices to enable those different things. Yes, the slide deck will be available to you later on. That includes some of the cool reporting that's coming along also. Application reporting, so you actually can get those audit reports to see those users when they're actually logging on and those attempts, all within those same things because you're actually authenticating against Azure Active Directory. And we just seamlessly integrate with those particular things. Some very cool stuff that's coming along. How do you audit all this stuff? People are changing things in Azure RemoteApp. Somebody removed the boss. He can't see apps. Operations logs are a great place to go and figure out who moved somebody's cheese. Or you get in there and figure out exactly who removed an application, who added it, who removed a user, who made all the different changes. Any change that you make using PowerShell or the Azure Management Portal, that's all logged in the operations logs. So where are we at? We're at the customer or user experience. I'm talking a lot. Devices and clients. So that kind of ends our administrative part. We're going to hop over to that client experience. So you guys all pretty much tried the client experience. Let's talk about what those are. how do you access all these Windows applications that are running in Azure? That's through the power of Remote Desktop on through the Remote Desktop clients. So regardless if you have an iOS, a Mac, an Android, Windows Phone, Windows 7, Windows 8 and above, Windows 10, Windows Embedded, we have all an experience for that. And so within each of our clients, we have an immersive experience, a sign-in experience, where you sign in, you see a list of your available applications, and you get to interact with those. In terms of embedded and thin clients, we support those also. So those are supported versions of Windows Embedded. We do not support third-party implementations of Azure Remote App. And let me explain a reason why. We get a lot of feedback. People are wondering, why can't I just use the inbox MSTSC? Well, the reason for that is to provide our service the agility. So like Thomas said, all those red dots back at the beginning, we're actually shipping updates to our service at least twice a month, if not more than that. We're revving our clients during those times too. So through our telemetry, through our reporting, we're looking at client failures, we're looking at log-on times, and we're optimizing, and we're making changes, and we're fixing those particular bugs. And so what we needed to do was find a medium in order to ship those updates faster. And using the standard inbox MSTSC, using Windows Update, didn't help because a lot of organizations use Config Manager or Intune or other things, and it would just delay that experience of that update getting to that end user. They could have a 3, 4, 5-month-old client, and that they're going to have a degraded experience. Using the click once technology in Windows, we actually can deliver those updates very, very quickly, and we could keep those updated. So that should give you an idea of the reason why that we use the Windows Update, or we don't use Windows Update and the MSTSC client, and we went to the click once client, is to give us that flexibility, that agility to actually update our client very, very quickly. And in fact, we're moving so fast. It's one of the other primary reasons why we do not support third-party implementations. It's because we're revving our clients so fast and so quick. What are some client best practices? Always close your applications when you're done. That prevents data loss. I'm going to explain the reason for that, I think, in the next slide. So when you're done with your application, just don't let it hang out. Properly close it. Talking about those update cycles, each of our clients have a very, iOS and Windows Phone, and those have their own app auto updaters. Recommend to keep those updated. That way, your particular customers and users have the latest version of the Remote Desktop or the Azure Remote App client. Why did you say close your applications? Well, to understand the reason for that, probably need to understand how a client behaves. So if I'm running Outlook, let's say, or I'm running my line of business application, and I haven't interacted with it in at least 4 hours, that session's actually going to terminate. So that RDP connection from the client to the server is actually going to disconnect. And that endpoint, where that logged on session, will remain logged on. So in like 10 minutes later, like at 4 hours and 10 minutes, you reconnect, it's going to be there and it's going to be live again. But if you don't reconnect in another 4 hours, so that's an 8-hour period of time, we're actually going to log you off forcefully on the back end. And so that's why I said properly close your applications to prevent the data loss. And so what we call those different states is just no really official terminology for it, but we just call it the idle log off, the disconnected log off, and the official logged off. Also, this is what you've also seen of when, when I connect to Azure Remote App the first time, it kind of takes 10, 15 seconds, but then after that, the app's really, really quick. It's for that same reason, is you have those logged on sessions in the background. Redirection. Redirection is a terminology that we use where my local device options are made available to the remote app. And some of those that are available are copy-paste. So if I have Word open locally or copy-paste, I can copy between one and the other, and also from my remote apps back to local. There's a whole bunch of other ones, audio, printer, serial ports. You can see which ones are enabled by default. There are 2 that are not enabled by default. That's USB and drive redirection. You can use Azure PowerShell to actually enable those today. In fact, you can use Azure PowerShell to disable all of these if you want to. If you want to say, I don't want copy-paste, you can actually disable that also. We have a really good doc on how to use PowerShell for that. One of our top feedback items is they would like that ability to do that in Azure Management Portal. And when we move over to the V2 portal, we'll have that option available to you. And so you get to see across the board which particular redirection capabilities exist for each of the clients. Mac is pretty good, Android. has some, but the most experienced one, or the most fully breadth, is our Windows client that we have on that. Redirected drives. This is really cool. So if you have your local PC and drive redirection as enabled, they'll show up as map drives in there. So there's a screenshot of my PC where my C drive of my local PC was actually made available as a map drive. The E drive was actually, I think it was my CD-ROM on my laptop was made available on that. And you can actually put things in there and do anything like any other map drives. Works pretty easy. That's available on Mac and Windows. And again, that's not enabled by default. You would have to enable that using the PowerShell. So user profile disk. So we talked earlier about, okay, Eric, you had these OS images, they have your apps, put your data external. Well, what about this user profile disk? And user profile disk, the easiest way to describe it is, if you're familiar with Windows Server 2012, we had user profile disk, and it's basically your profile, your C users, in this case, Eric, OR, that's actually on a VHD. And when I make a connection, we actually mount that. And so all that user data resides on that. And so we give you 50 gigs of storage on that particular user profile disk on that. When you're not connected to Azure RemoteApp and you have a logged off session, you cannot share that. So don't share this. What you'll want to do is actually share using another data storage or file sharing technologies. OneDrive for Business is really good. Map drives, Azure Files. Actually, I'll be showing that of how to use Azure Files with map drives at my theater session later on this week. SharePoint, Dropbox. Things that are not supported, Consumer, OneDrive, or Box. Those are just not supported on Windows Server 2012 R2. They may work, but they are not supported officially on that. So some OneDrive for Business considerations. OneDrive for Business works a little bit differently than OneDrive Consumer in the sense of all the files are downloaded. So if you took advantage of that OneDrive for Business where you put unlimited amounts of data up there, when you log on to Azure RemoteApp, it might exceed that 50 gig limit and you'll have connection failures. So those are some of the considerations that you'll need to have for when using OneDrive for Business with Azure RemoteApp. Some of the other things you've seen is customized namespace. You can actually change this. This is really cool in the Start menu. I think the one that I showed was, whoops. So the one here was basically, I used Ignite Demo. That was the one that I created, and you can customize that to be Contoso apps or however you want those. It's not a very discoverable thing. What you need to do is go to Settings, and then you could click on Edit, and you can change those. So moving on, 12 minutes. Update your image. So you have a good idea of the end user experience, the redirection and customer client experience for that. Now you want to update. Let's kind of walk through that. So I talked before and I demoed to you guys how to create a custom image in Azure. Well, you could create that custom image on premises also using Hyper-V. You can also use a config manager if you want to. If you create a operating system deployment task sequence and you want to create that image in Windows Server 20 or Config Manager 2012 R2, you can actually create a task sequence and it exports it out to a VHD. Really, really convenient feature for that. Or what I demoed to you guys was creating an Azure VM. That's really, really simple. The two things with the top two are on-prem, so you're actually going to have to upload all of that data. Again, gigs of data up in Azure. That could take a lot of period of time. Just doing it within Azure VM is very, very quickly. To create it by hand, there's 10 steps. We document it out there. It's basically install the image, configure a few things, install your applications, disable encryption file service, install a KB, and then sysprep, and then upload that image. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. So, Eric, you've talked about we've created it. Now we need to edit that image. We need to do some type of, we didn't set a registry key, or I didn't install the right app, or I wanted to add another app. Do I have to create a new collection? Which that's what we hear most people say that they do. They don't know about the update feature. And so the easiest way to do that is when you create an Azure VM, you need to make a change to it. Just take that image, boot it back up into the VM, and then make your changes. Go through that process that I talked about before, capture it, put it in an image, copy it back over into an Azure RemoteApp library, and then do the update. And the feature is very simple. You select on your collection. At the bottom, there's a big arrow that points to it. It says Update. You'll click on that, and you'll be presented with a couple of options. And those options are basically select the image that you want to choose to update it. And then also, what is the end-user client experience for that? And so we'll go through that whole provisioning process again. And at the end of that, you have two options. You can either immediately update or just give the users time. They'll actually get a banner bar notification that says, hey, within 10 minutes, your connection will be terminated because of an update on that. But that's the basic process of how to do that. Now, that process might take, depending upon the size of clients. If you have 100 users assigned to Azure Remote App, what we've seen is basically 15 minutes per every 10 users. That's the particular time. Because what we're doing on the back end, kind of explained to you before, is we're creating those instances on the back end. So here we are, cycle of management and administration. That should take you on that journey of across different things as you think about when you test drive Azure Remote App or you go about putting it into practice. So we talked about that. Will my app work? I've got 10 minutes to run through this. But first, I want to capture some of the best practices and tips for Azure Remote App. Never store data on the C drive. Test your apps. Enable app auto-update for RD clients on your devices. Properly close. And I think the last one is very important. You saw that how fast we're iterating. We're iterating twice a month. We're coming out with new features. We actually publish our roadmap. And then at the end of every month, we actually publish on our blog what things we actually did. All of our documentation updates and all the new features and everything on the Remote Desktop blog as we publish it. So we just got done publishing the April updates for Azure Remote App that are out there. So paying attention to that. Our roadmap and also our blog to stay with the latest. Some of the key points, just to recap of this, these are going to be very important when I talk about the next slide. How much does all this cost? I'm not going to deep dive into the cost. There's two billing plans. There's basic, costs $10 per user per month with a 20 minimum. Same with standard. It's $15 per user per month with a 20 minimum. How to try Azure Remote App. So you guys all tried the end user experience, or that's what I was encouraging you guys at the beginning. The IT Pro, the administrative experience, is what we said on the right-hand side, and that is you have an Azure subscription. You can go out and try Azure Remote App free for 30 days, get a full feel for it. You could create 2 collections, get a full experience for that administrative experience on that. But what I want to talk about is moving into, it's all about the apps. And I don't think I'm going to have time to go into all these things. I'll try to get to some troubleshooting here very shortly if we can carry over. But let's talk about QuickBooks really quick. Wednesday and Thursday I have theater sessions. I can talk more into that. So that's a great opportunity to continue the discussion. QuickBooks, this is the most often asked question or application that I ask about. Can I deploy QuickBooks in Azure Remote App? Well, going back to some of those different things is you need to understand QuickBooks and the topology of it. And basically, QuickBooks has 3 different types of deployment options. They have Essential and Peer-to-Peer, which basically they have a Windows or a Unix VM. We're just going to say Windows at this period of time. And that has the QuickBooks database server and the company file on it. Now, you can access that through Remote Desktop Session Host also. But fundamentally, all 3 of these require that the company file to be located on the QuickBooks database server. So, general flow of will my app work that we have is app compat, licensing plan, where is my data thing. I have this ugly eye chart. This is great for you later on when you download these slides to take your application and work through these particular things. And so they're kind of divided into these segments. And by the end, when you have your application and you run through it, it might look a little bit like this. And so we'll put QuickBooks through this. And that is QuickBooks installed on a Microsoft image? It's a custom application, so you need a custom image. Does QuickBooks work on Windows Server 2012 R2? Check the QuickBooks requirements for that. Yes, it does work. Where is the QuickBooks data stored? The QuickBooks data stored is on the QuickBooks database server with the company file. Is that data accessible over the internet, local file system, or on a private network? Well, it's on a private network because QuickBooks only supports accessing that data using standard Windows networking. Standard Windows networking. And up until now, a hybrid deployment is the only way to do it. But coming soon, towards the end of this month, you'll be able to do that in a cloud deployment. So for the sake of this content being relevant, we're going to say both a cloud and a hybrid deployment is how you can actually do that. Is a hybrid deployment really what you need? No, probably not. You could get away with just using Microsoft accounts or Azure Active Directory. Hybrid deployment using AD Connect, it's pretty heavy in order to do that. So that's kind of a walkthrough on this. I did a Channel 9 where I talked a little bit more about this. That should give you a good idea of kind of that. And so as you walk through this, you take your application and you're going to put it through. I got some cool animation. I spent lots of time trying to figure this out. Look at that. So you choose your own adventure type thing. But at the end, this provides a really good workflow. So you go back and you're either a customer or your customer asks you, hey, will my app work on Azure RemoteApp? You could download these slides. This will be available to you and follow along just like the little QuickBooks thing did, and you'll get an idea. Do I need hybrid, cloud, all the different configurations and different things. So again, staying engaged. Still got more slides, and I still have like 20 minutes of more demos too. We have time. Feedback form. Our feedback's very important. You guys providing the feedback. What I showed you earlier, the number one feedback thing is, what was it, sir? Shortcuts on the desktop. Shortcuts on the start menu. So I just demoed that to you guys. That's a feature that's coming. It was really cool to be able to demo that to you guys. Feedback, continuing to vote on those. Our discussion forums, engaging with conversation, myself, Nihar, quite a few other people in the product group, our documentation. And then I also facilitate twice a month a weekly Ask the Experts. And if you just go out to Azure webinars, you can get links for those particular things. Or keep in touch with us in our blogs, where I have the links for all of that. Thomas told me to put this slide in here. We have a great mobility type scavenger hunt. So go out there. It's all incorporated with all the different things of enterprise mobility to include Azure RemoteApp in order to get those little pins. I saw quite a few of you guys have those already. Again, my name was Eric Orman. That's my email. If you guys have questions, I'll be immediately available here, but also in our booth for the rest of the day. So I know a couple of you guys had questions. I'll be able to answer those questions, or at the theater show. And so the theme that I have for the two theater shows is will my app work on Azure RemoteApp? And I have a couple of examples for that. I'll walk through of how to use Azure Files, which is basically an SMB file share in Azure, and how that works with Microsoft Access. And then also show you how to publish a doc from a OneDrive consumer thing, which is pretty cool how to do that. I don't know how much time we have. Do you guys want to ask me questions, or do you want more time to show you some cool things? Questions or times to demo? What do you guys think? Demo? Cool. I'll do a demo because I have all day to ask the questions, so I want to make sure we maximize the things. So some of the cool things. So I'm going to come back out here. I don't want to do that, but I had this particular client out here, and I launched this Azure RemoteApp. So one of the cool things I could do is a Control-Alt-End, and basically that's going to prompt a SaaS. And so that is the Azure RemoteApp, and I can actually launch Task Manager. And so that Task Manager is actually Task Manager of the Azure RemoteApp instance running. So I could come in here and I could see, oh, what's on the back end? It's an Intel Xeon. Here's the CPU. I could actually see the number of users that are signed on here. I'm the only guy that's actually on here, which things that are actually running. Detail service, you guys all know these particular things. If you want to launch other applications, you can run tasks. You can launch Server Manager, if you want to launch that. If you want to come down here to the command prompt, you could launch Explorer if you want to, and there can get this Explorer. And through the power of copy and paste, like in here, let's say downloads, let's say I want to copy a particular file on there. So let's just say new file test. I can right-click, copy, and here I am. This is my Azure RemoteApp instance, my downloads. And I can actually come in here, and I could say paste, and I could put it in there. So through power of copy and paste and those particular things, pretty cool. That's some simple things that you can do. At the back end of all this, sure, we're just remoting the application to you. But behind all that is a Windows server. So you have all those capabilities to do those things that you're used to. One of the key points, if you're in a hybrid deployment, those hybrid Azure RemoteApp instances are on your network. So if you want to install the config manager agent on those, if you want to actually bake it into the image using that, you could do that. Or you could use standard client push, or any of the other deployment options, because you actually put it on your data center or in a VNet, in an OU that you specified. So you can apply GPO to it. You can push Ops Manager. You can push config manager client. You can in fact remote desktop to that particular instance if you wanted to. mstsc exe/admin would be the way to do that. What was the other point that I was making? If you're using a cloud deployment, you don't have that opportunity to install the config manager client and be on the local network. So I would recommend that you take, when you're creating your image, create an admin account called sysadmin, and you actually could put it in the administrators group so that if you need times to elevate or help out that user, you can help them with that. But I think one of the coolest demos that I have, and I worked pretty hard on this one, let's see if it actually stayed up. So here I am, and this PC here didn't work, so I'm actually going back to my one that I was creating my custom image with. And so one of the things I'm going to do is I had this application. I could either publish remote assistance or did I publish it? Yep, I had it there, but actually, you know what? I need to sign out because to do this demo, which one was it? eric.or@outlook.com. So sometimes you need to help your users with their application. If some of you are familiar with Shadow, another way of actually doing that is just using standard Azure remote assistance for that. And so on this particular one, I published MSRA. So I can actually launch Microsoft Remote Assistance. That's going to launch here in a second. It's going to prompt me, and I'm going to use Easy Connect in order to do that. This is really good on an iPad or an Android device. The user can launch it. On this is going to be my helper PC that's over here. So I'm going to launch it. I'm going to help somebody. I'm going to use Easy Connect. It's going to prompt me for this password. This one over here is launching. Maybe I'll launch Internet Explorer 2 so you can kind of see what that is. So I'm going to invite somebody I trust. I'm going to use Easy Connect. It's going to come out and ask. I'm going to copy and paste this particular over here. So again, I'm running the Azure RemoteApp client on this presentation PC. And it should prompt me if my where did the invite go? There it is. Would you like to allow Eric? Yes. And in a second here, it's going to connect. And you're actually going to be able to see. And in the meantime, you know what? I'm going to launch Calculator, because that way it's really cool. There we go. And over here, it does the merge, and I have full access to watch everything that end user is doing if I want to move here. So that's where you could provide remote assistance to those particular apps to help watch them. And of course, you always want to request control. So if you want to actually request control, and again, I have access over here. I can actually move that, and I can snap it, and I can do all those things. I actually put it over here on my second monitor. And the way that I got that all to work is basically just enable Microsoft Remote Assistance on that particular remote desktop session host on that when I created that custom image. Two key things that you'll need to do. Remote Assistance is not enabled by default on Windows Server, so you got to enable that. And then also the PNRP service is something else you got to enable. And then there's two ports, 3540 UDP and 1900 UDP, and things should just simply work using that token of that name. That's how you can provide remote assistance to your particular clients. It doesn't matter. If I have my iOS device, I have Android, and I'm having problems, just have the user launch remote assistance, publish it, and you can simply connect to it. Easy as that. Cool. I'm way over my time. And so I also wanted to invite up a couple other people. So Thomas, you guys met him, but also Nihar. He's also a peer of mine that works in the Azure RemoteApp and the product group. We could help answer your guys' questions. Again, these slides will be made available to you at the end. So I can answer your questions here, or I'll be at the booth for the rest of the day. And if you don't know where our booth is, it says Desktop Virtualization. It's the Enterprise Mobility section over in the Azure larger group. Thank you guys for your time. Have a great day.